today's episode, we're uncovering a devastating tragedy on Annapurna, where two veteran Sherpas guided a woman they knew would never return. What began as one woman's quest to prove her worth would end in a freezing bivouac above 24,000 feet, where the desperate need for validation finally collided with the mountain's unforgiving truth. It was October 14th, 2016, on Annapurna's north face, where autumn winds were already stripping the mountain of its brief climbing season. At 26,545 feet, Annapurna remains one of the deadliest peaks on Earth, with a fatality rate that has historically claimed one climber for every 3 who reach its summit. Unlike Everest, where commercial expeditions have established relatively predictable routes, Annapurna offers no safe passage. Every approach demands technical skill, perfect weather, and the kind of judgment that can't be purchased or rushed. Base camp sat at 13,800 feet in a glacial moraine scattered with prayer flags and memorial stones for those who had never returned. The temperature hovered around 18 degrees Fahrenheit as expedition teams made final preparations for what meteorologists predicted would be the last viable summit window of the season. The air smelled faintly of kerosene and melted snow, and every gust snapped the prayer flags hard enough to sound like fabric tearing. Among the tents and supply caches, one small expedition stood apart from the larger operations, a 2-person Sherpa team assigned to guide a single American client who had arrived in Nepal 6 weeks earlier with more ambition than experience. Rachel Brennan was 34 years old, a former marketing executive from Portland who had discovered mountaineering 3 years earlier during what she called her reconstruction period. Following a divorce and the collapse of her corporate career, Rachel found herself without the life she had built her identity around. A friend suggested rock climbing as therapy, and Rachel threw herself into it with the same intensity she once devoted to quarterly targets. Within 18 months, she progressed from indoor walls to outdoor routes to her first high-altitude expedition on Aconcagua, the summit of South America's highest peak at 22,838 feet, transformed something inside her. Standing above the clouds, exhausted and hypothermic but triumphant, Rachel felt a clarity she had never found in boardrooms or counseling sessions. She proved to herself that she could endure suffering and still come out the other side. The feeling was addictive, and it rewired her sense of normal. Back in Portland, the office lights felt artificial, conversations felt small, ordinary life felt like a room she couldn't breathe in. Within months of returning from Argentina, she began planning for something bigger. Annapurna had not been her first choice. Rachel originally applied to several Everest expeditions, but was rejected by reputable operators who questioned her limited, high-altitude experience. One outfitter explained that a single climb to 22,000 feet did not qualify someone for the death zone realities of an 8,000-meter peak. Rachel interpreted the rejections not as safety concerns, but as gatekeeping by an elitist establishment that doubted women could perform at extreme altitude. She found a smaller Nepali operator willing to accept her for Annapurna, a mountain with far less commercial traffic and far less screening. What Rachel didn't fully understand was that Annapurna's lower profile existed precisely because of its danger. The mountain's technical demands and unpredictable conditions made it unsuitable for guided tourism. Climbers who attempted Annapurna were expected to possess advanced skills and extensive high-altitude experience. Rachel had neither, but she convinced herself that determination and fitness could compensate for what she lacked. She had lived her entire adult life believing effort was a substitute for uncertainty, that if she pushed hard enough, the world eventually surrendered. Annapurna was not that kind of world. Her assigned Sherpas were Mingma Dorje, 43, and his nephew Lakpa Tenzing, 28, both from the village of Manang. Mingma had summited Annapurna 4 times across a 20-year guiding career and had witnessed 11 deaths on the mountain, including his own brother, in an avalanche in 2009. The loss nearly drove him from climbing, but the economic realities of supporting a family pulled him back each season. He approached guiding with fatalism. Some clients listened and lived, others refused and died, and the mountain made no distinction between the deserving and the foolish. Lakpa had 7 years of expedition experience and had summited Annapurna twice, both times under his uncle's guidance. He was known for exceptional route finding and for voicing concerns other Sherpas often swallowed out of deference to paying clients. Where many guides learn to follow instructions and collect their fees, Lakpa kept a stubborn commitment to telling uncomfortable truths. It had cost him work with operators who preferred compliant staff, but Mingma valued his nephew's judgment over diplomacy. Both men recognized problems with their client, from the first days of the expedition. Rachel's gear was expensive, but poorly suited to Annapurna's specific challenges. Her down suit was built for Everest's established camp system, but offered less protection for the exposure they would face on the north face. Her mountaineering boots were a half size too large, a fit issue that would become dangerous as circulation decreased, and precision mattered. Her ice axes were lightweight models designed for milder alpine terrain, lacking the durability needed for hard blue ice above 20,000 feet. Even the small details looked wrong in Mingma's hands. Too many brand new straps, too many untested buckles, too much confidence in equipment that had never been forced to prove itself. More concerning than her equipment was her technique. During acclimatization rotations, Mingma and Lakpa watched her struggle with basic crampon work on moderate ice. She crossed her feet while traversing, risking a snag and a fall. Her self-arrest was slow and uncertain. On fixed ropes, she clipped and unclipped her ascender with hesitation that revealed unfamiliarity with the system. These weren't minor gaps, they were fundamental weaknesses on a mountain that punished small mistakes with permanent consequences. At altitude, the brain's margin for problem solving shrank with every 1,000 feet. The mistakes you could correct at 14,000 feet became fatal habits at 24,000. Mingma raised concerns with the expedition operator during the second week. He explained that the client was not ready for this mountain and that her skills were insufficient for technical sections above Camp 3. He recommended ending the expedition or hiring additional support. The response was dismissive. Rachel had paid, signed her waivers, and was legally entitled to attempt the summit. If Mingma was uncomfortable, he could forfeit payment and return to Manang. The financial pressure was real. Mingma's daughter was enrolled in a nursing program in Kathmandu that consumed most of the family's savings. Lakpa was saving for his wedding the following spring. Walking away from a $4,000 guiding fee was not a decision either man could make lightly. They discussed it privately and reached a compromise. Continue the expedition, but establish firm turnaround criteria at each camp. If Rachel couldn't meet the benchmarks, the summit attempt would end, no matter what she demanded. The acclimatization period lasted 3 weeks, following the standard protocol of climbing high and sleeping low. Rachel performed adequately on lower rotations, reaching Camp 1 at 17,400 feet and Camp 2 at 19,800 feet without serious incident. Her pace was slow but consistent, and she showed none of the obvious altitude sickness that would provide a clean justification for ending the expedition. Mingma noted she relied heavily on oxygen, earlier than experienced climbers usually did, but she kept moving. She was stubborn in a way that looked like strength from a distance, the kind of stubbornness that felt admirable right up until it became irreversible. What the Sherpas couldn't observe directly was Rachel's deteriorating mental state during long hours alone in her tent. She began with confidence, bordering on arrogance, certain her fitness and willpower would carry her through anything. But as weeks passed and the mountain revealed its scale, doubt crept in. Other climbers spoke casually about deaths on this peak. Rachel overheard stories of avalanches and bodies still frozen on the upper slopes, grim waypoints for those who followed. The words landed in her like a slow poison, and she felt herself shrinking under them. Rather than acknowledge fear, Rachel converted it into rigid determination. She had sold her condominium to finance the expedition. She had told everyone she was going to summit Annapurna. Turning back would mean returning to Portland as a failure, confirming every doubt she believed others held about her. The summit had fused with her self-worth. Reaching it would prove she was extraordinary. Failing would prove she was ordinary. And to Rachel's mind, ordinary was the one thing she could not survive. The weather window arrived on October 12th, a 48-hour period of high pressure that would provide stable conditions for a summit attempt. Forecasts showed winds dropping below 25 miles per hour on the upper mountain, with temperatures cold but survivable at minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The window was narrow and would close rapidly as the next system approached. Teams that missed it would likely have no second chance before the winter shut down the mountain. The summit push began from Camp 2 on the morning of October the 13th. Rachel, Mingma, and Lakpa departed at 4:30 a.m., their headlamps cutting through darkness as they climbed toward Camp 3 at 22,500 feet. The route followed a steep couloir prone to rockfall once daylight loosened frozen debris from the cliffs above. Their crampons scraped hard ice, the sound sharp and brittle in the thin air. They moved quickly through it, reaching safer slopes as dawn light began spreading across the face. Rachel's pace slowed dramatically above 21,000 feet. Each step required 3 or 4 breaths to recover, and she stopped often on the fixed ropes. Mingma monitored her with growing concern. At this rate, they would reach Camp 3 too late to rest properly before a summit push. He halted at 21,800 feet and checked her oxygen saturation. The reading was 64%, dangerously low, even with oxygen flowing at 3 liters per minute. Mingma told Rachel her levels were too low and that they should descend to Camp 2 and wait. Rachel refused immediately. She insisted she felt fine, that numbers didn't reflect how she experienced at altitude, and that stopping would waste the weather window. She demanded they continue to Camp 3 as planned. Lakpa intervened, his tone firm despite the expectation to defer to clients. He explained that 64% saturation was a warning sign. Below 55%, the brain began taking damage. If she continued climbing and dropped further, she would develop confusion, impaired judgment, and eventual collapse. There would be no rescue. If she went down above Camp 3, she would die on this mountain. Rachel dismissed the warning the way she dismissed every obstacle in her life: divorce, job loss, rebuilding from nothing. This was just another test of willpower. She told the Sherpas to keep climbing, or she would proceed alone. The threat forced Mingma's hand. Abandoning a client would destroy his reputation. He couldn't physically stop her from continuing, and watching her die alone would haunt him far more than staying beside her. He chose to proceed, privately resolving to end the attempt at Camp 3 if her condition didn't improve. They reached Camp 3 at 2:45 p.m. after nearly 10 hours of climbing. The camp occupied a narrow shelf carved into the north face, protected from the worst wind, but exposed to the vast emptiness of the Himalayan sky. 2 small tents had been established earlier in the season, stocked with oxygen, fuel, and emergency supplies. Rachel collapsed into her tent and fell asleep within minutes, too exhausted to eat. Mingma used the satellite phone to contact the base camp with a report. He stated the client was severely fatigued and showing signs of altitude illness. He recommended aborting the summit attempt and descending in the morning. The operator acknowledged the message but offered no guidance, leaving the decision to the climbing team. That evening, Lakpa checked Rachel's oxygen saturation again. It had improved slightly to 68% after rest and oxygen, but remained below what experienced climbers considered safe. More concerning was her cognition. She asked twice whether they had already reached the summit. Her speech was slightly slurred, and she struggled to answer simple questions. Her eyes held a distant, glassy focus. These were textbook symptoms of high-altitude cerebral edema, brain swelling caused by extreme altitude. The only effective treatment was immediate descent. Lakpa explained it directly, telling her she needed to go down now or she might not survive the night. Rachel responded with anger. She accused Lakpa of sabotaging her expedition out of sexism, of assuming she couldn't handle the mountain because she was a woman. She was tired of men telling her what she couldn't do. She was going to the summit tomorrow, with or without them. Mingma stepped in before it escalated further. He told Rachel they would reassess in the morning, that if she improved overnight, they would consider a summit push, but if symptoms continued, they would descend. He didn't say that he had already decided to go down at first light, regardless. Sometimes saving a client meant making decisions they would refuse. The night at Camp 3 was brutal. Temperatures dropped to minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind rose through the early morning hours. The tent fabric snapped and flexed like it was trying to rip free, and rime ice formed along seams where breath condensed and froze. Rachel slept fitfully, waking to adjust her oxygen mask and fight the claustrophobic pressure of the tent. In fragmented dreams, she stood on the summit surrounded by everyone who had doubted her: her ex-husband, her former boss, the operators who rejected her, and a father who died when she was 19 without ever telling her he was proud. At 3 a.m. on October 14th, Mingma woke to find Rachel already dressed and preparing to leave. She announced she was beginning the summit push and expected them to follow. When Mingma protested that they had agreed to reassess her condition, Rachel cut him off. She said she had assessed herself and was ready. If they refused, she would climb alone and report their unprofessional conduct to the operator. The threat exploited the power imbalance of commercial guiding. Mingma depended on client reviews. A complaint could end his work with the operator and spread through the tight community of outfitters. He faced a choice between risking his livelihood by refusing an unsafe climb and risking his conscience by enabling what he believed would be fatal. Lakpa settled it. He said he would accompany Rachel regardless of his uncle's decision. He would not let her climb alone, even if climbing together meant witnessing her death. At least he could provide whatever help was possible and document what happened. Mingma had no choice but to follow. The decision had been made. What happened in the hours that followed is exactly why we document these stories. If you're here for the first time, subscribe to see more. Now back to the mountain. They departed Camp 3 at 3:47 a.m., headlamps illuminating steep ice leading toward the summit ridge. Above Camp 3 was the most technical section of the climb, demanding precise crampon work on 50-degree faces and careful navigation around crevasses hidden beneath thin snow bridges. The ice was hard and glossy, and every tool placement felt final. Even under ideal conditions, this terrain required flawless concentration. Rachel deteriorated rapidly once they started climbing. Her technique, already marginal, became sloppy on steep ice. She stumbled twice in the first hour, caught by the fixed rope but showing the impaired coordination that accompanied cerebral edema. Her pace slowed to half the expected rate. She stopped responding to questions. Her attention narrowed to the act of moving upward. By 6:30 a.m., they reached 24,200 feet after nearly 3 hours of climbing that should have taken less than 90 minutes. The sun rose over the eastern peaks, illuminating a vast Himalayan panorama and the enormous distance still separating them from the summit. At their pace, they would not reach the top before early afternoon, far too late for a safe descent. Mingma called a halt on a small ledge protected by a rock outcrop. He checked Rachel's oxygen and found she had burned nearly half her summit cylinder. Her oximeter showed 58% saturation despite maximum oxygen flow, a sign of severe hypoxia requiring immediate descent. Mingma watched her hands fumble with her mask strap, fingers moving too slowly. Mingma made one final attempt to reason with her. The numbers told a clear story. Her brain wasn't receiving enough oxygen to function. If she continued, she would lose consciousness within hours. Even if she somehow reached the summit, she would never survive the descent. The mountain would kill her, and there was nothing he or Lakpa could do at this altitude. Rachel listened with a detached expression of someone no longer fully processing language. After a long pause, she said she understood the risks and accepted them. This was her choice. If she died here, at least she would die attempting something that mattered. She asked whether they were going to keep climbing or whether she needed to continue alone. The question wasn't really a question. Rachel was beyond rational decision-making, her judgment compromised by the same swelling she couldn't recognize. Mingma knew arguing further was pointless. He exchanged a look with Lakpa that said everything. They were going to watch this woman die, and they couldn't stop it. They continued climbing. The next 3 hours were a slow-motion catastrophe. Rachel fell twice on steep ice above 24,500 feet, crampon points skittering before the fixed rope arrested her. Each fall cost time and energy. Each recovery took longer. Her movements became mechanical, her body operating on autopilot while her conscious mind retreated somewhere unreachable. The wind picked up along the face, pushing spindrift into their goggles and erasing small footholds faster than they could trust them. At 25,800 feet, less than 800 feet below the summit, Rachel collapsed onto the ice and did not get up. She lay face down, breathing in rapid, shallow bursts that failed to deliver enough oxygen. Lakpa tried to help her stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She was conscious but unable to move, her body surrendering to conditions it had never been equipped to survive. Mingma made the call that had been inevitable since they left Camp 3. They were going down. They would carry her as far as possible and hope a lower altitude would reverse the worst of her symptoms. It was desperate, but it was the only plan that existed. Getting Rachel down required constant coordination. They rigged a makeshift harness system with rope and carabiners, lowering her down steep sections while controlling the descent with devices attached to fixed lines. The work was exhausting and dangerous, demanding precision on terrain that punished the smallest error. Every anchor point became a decision. Every rope movement measured against the possibility that one mistake would create 3 bodies instead of 1. Rachel drifted in and out of consciousness. Once she asked whether they had reached the summit. Lakpa told her they were going down and that she needed to stay awake and help as much as she could. She nodded vaguely and closed her eyes again. They reached Camp 3 at 4:15 p.m., 9 hours after departing, and with less than 2 hours of daylight left. Rachel was unresponsive, breathing shallow and irregular, her skin gray-blue with oxygen deprivation. Mingma administered emergency dexamethasone to reduce brain swelling, but he knew it was likely too late. The options were all bad. Staying meant she would likely die before morning. Continuing the descent in darkness with an unconscious patient would endanger all 3. Helicopter rescue was impossible at this altitude. Mingma chose to descend until darkness forced them to stop. They would try to reach Camp 2, where a lower elevation might give Rachel a chance. It was a slim hope, but it was the only hope. They left Camp 3 at 4:45 p.m. The sun was low, casting long shadows across frozen slopes. Temperature dropped rapidly as daylight faded, the cold tightening like a vice around exposed skin. Mingma led, testing each step on deteriorating snow, while Lakpa managed Rachel's harness from above. They descended 600 vertical feet before darkness forced them to stop. Their headlamps were enough for careful movement on moderate ground, but the steep couloir ahead demanded visual precision that the narrow beams couldn't provide. One misstep would send all 3 tumbling. The bivouac site was barely adequate, a shallow depression that offered little wind protection and none from cold. They wrapped Rachel in every spare layer and emergency blanket, forming an insulated cocoon around her motionless body. Her breathing was barely perceptible, each exhale accompanied by a rattling sound that suggested fluid accumulating in her lungs. Frost formed where the breath hit fabric, growing thicker as the hours passed. Mingma stayed awake, monitoring her condition and adjusting oxygen to stretch what remained. Lakpa slept in 2-hour shifts, preserving strength for the descent at first light. Neither man spoke about what they both understood, that Rachel would almost certainly not survive until morning. In the dark, surrounded by wind and empty ice, the mountain felt less like a place and more like a machine. Rachel Brennan's heart stopped at approximately 2:40 a.m. on October 15, 2016. Mingma detected the absence of pulse during a routine check and attempted CPR for several minutes before accepting that resuscitation was impossible at this altitude with limited equipment. She was 34 years old and had never reached the summit that had come to represent everything she needed to prove. The Sherpas secured Rachel's body to the slope using ice screws and cord, marking the location with a GPS waypoint. They descended at first light, reaching base camp by late afternoon. The inquiry conducted by the Nepal Ministry of Tourism concluded that Rachel Brennan had died from high-altitude cerebral edema, complicated by severe hypoxia and exposure. The report noted the Sherpas had documented multiple warnings and recommended descent at several points. The client refused and insisted on continuing despite clear physiological warning signs. No fault was assigned to the guiding team. Rachel's body was recovered 3 weeks later and cremated in Kathmandu per her family's wishes, her ashes scattered in the Annapurna region she had found so compelling. Mingma Dorje continued guiding for 2 more seasons before retiring to open a small tea house in his village. Lakpa completed his wedding the following spring and eventually took over his uncle's guiding business, maintaining a strict policy of refusing clients who did not meet minimum experience requirements. The mountain remained indifferent to all of it, the ambitions and warnings, the determination and despair. Annapurna had claimed another life, as it had before, and would again, the snow covering Rachel's final campsite within days, erasing all evidence she had ever been there. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.